Welcome everybody to geohug, and today is going to be such a fun one. I'm so excited that we have John Long joining us today. So John has been the strategic professor in paleontology at Flinders University since 2013, and John's research is focused on the early evolution of fishes and sharks based on his fieldwork throughout Australia and from 4 expeditions to Antarctica. He has published over 200 scientific papers, some 160 general science articles, and over 28 books. And his latest book, The Secret History of Sharks, The Rise of the Ocean's Most Fearsome Predators, was released last year, and I cannot wait for him to take us through some of his research on the lessons learned from their evolution and survival. So this is going to be a fantastic session. I hope you all enjoy it. Please get your questions ready. We'll be opening up the floor at the end. But yes, thank you so much, John, for joining. It's just awesome having you here today.
It's my pleasure, Jess. I'm happy to share my new book and my research with you all.
I cannot wait to pick your brain about your career because we don't get a lot of paleontologists on geohug. So this is quite exciting and unique for us, which is really cool. But you started as a geologist, so I'm really curious how your career went the way it did.
Okay, well, I started as a kid collecting fossils in Melbourne. So this is a shark's tooth I found when I was 8 years of age, and that got me hooked on fossils. And of course, I worked closely as a kid collecting fossils with the local museum. When I got to university, I went to Melbourne University so I could study geology and paleontology as my major, and studied with some of the great geologists of the day there, like John Lovering, who taught us about, the first unit about the universe and geology of the earth, and various other wonderful lecturers. But then I transferred over to Monash for third year and honours because Pat Rich had just arrived from America as a vertebrate paleontologist. And we didn't have too many people that specialised in vertebrates, the evolution of backboned animals in Australia. So that's why I changed. And I stayed at Monash, did my honours and PhD there, and in the Department of Earth Sciences. So then I did 6 years of postdocing, all in geology departments at the ANU, at UWA in Perth, and also the University of Tasmania, where I worked on various projects funded by ARC grants and scholarships, fellowships and things. I was a QE2 fellow at the University of Western Australia, and that's where I first went up to the Kimberley to work on the go-go sites that have been a lifelong research interest for me. But after that, I ended up getting jobs in museums. So I worked at the Western Australian Museum for about 16 years in the Department of Earth and Planetary Sciences as curator of vertebrate paleontology. Then I went to Museum Victoria, where I was head of sciences for 5 years. And I got to work with the whole sciences department, building fabulous new galleries of geology, paleontology, biodiversity, and so on. But I suppose a career highlight was I was appointed as the vice president of the Los Angeles County Museum of Natural History in California. And that was a wonderful appointment because for 3 years, we had all this amazing funding to build big galleries on big budgets. So we built 2 earth sciences galleries on the evolution of dinosaurs and mammals, and one on the history of Los Angeles while I was there. And then I got headhunted to come back to Australia with the strategic professorship at Flinders University. People always say, why is it called strategic professorship? Well, it's simple, really. It was a strategic appointment. They brought a whole lot of people from overseas back to Flinders to just build the research and get the research really firing on all cylinders. And I've been there ever since and really loved it.
Wow. I was we were chatting offline before we went live, and yeah, your whole career just sounds fascinating. Like you've been to Antarctica, you've been to all these museums around the world. I'm like, what was Antarctica? I just have a billion questions for you. Just tell me more about your life, please.
Okay, well, I went to Antarctica the first time in the late 80s and early 90s on a very big expedition with the Kiwis, with Margaret Bradshaw, where we flew down to Scott Base, and then we did our training, and then we're airlifted out in a Hercules to a very remote part of the Transantarctic Mountains, which hadn't really been mapped before. So we were doing both geological mapping and measuring sections. I was there as the fish paleontologist collecting fossils, which we're using to determine the age of the different layers through biostratigraphy. So it was a very geology-orientated kind of research trip. But I was happy because I was finding lots of amazing fossils. And in fact, my new shark book opens with the first scenes are of me in Antarctica, almost losing my life, nearly falling down a crevasse, but getting onto a mountain to find these fossil sharks. So I wrote two other books on Antarctica, one about the expedition called Mountains of Madness, A Journey Through Antarctica, which came out in 2000, and also a more academic book with Jeff Stilwell called Frozen in Time, The Paleontology of Antarctica, which is just a book about the prehistory of Antarctica.
Wow, that is brilliant. Yeah, I feel like I could just ask you questions for hours and find out about some of the awesome
Well, a
experiences.
lot of it will come out in the talk anyway.
Yeah, it's so cool. I was curious as well. We always get our guest speakers to bring on some pet rocks.
Yeah.
I'm curious what you have for us today.
Well, this is one of my favorite rocks of all time because it was a gift. It's actually a hornfels, as you can kind of see, very dense black rock, but it's perfectly shaped. Imagine this in a body of water sticking up. It was given to me by a bonsai master in Japan. It's actually a suiseki, or a stone that has artistic qualities because it looks like something. And this one actually was given to me with a name. It's Shimagata, meaning island shape. And there's a special significance because at the time I was also running a karate dojo in West Australia, and I was a sensei. So the bonsai master gave it to me as one sensei to another as a very special gift. So it's been amazing. And the other thing I've got that's not really a pet rock, but it's a favorite thing is this big megalodon tooth, a tooth of the largest predatory animal that ever lived on Earth. And I'll be talking about that later in the talk. But this is a real tooth of a giant megalodon shark. So yeah,
I knew they were big, but it's like the size of your head.
this one's about, oh well, I've got a ruler here. If you measure it on the diagonal, it's about let's have a look. Zero. It's about 14 centimeters on the diagonal, so it's pretty big.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's impressive.
yeah.
That is very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I cannot wait to hear some of your research. So thank you for taking the time to share it with us. If you want to, yeah, share your screen and we'll get stuck into it.
Okay, well, let's get started. So today's talk is it's a popular sort of talk. It's not too technical because I know most of you out there are going to be geologists, but it does dwell on a lot of the geological changes that have happened in our oceans through past time. Because the story of sharks, they go back so far in prehistory to the Ordovician, 465 million years ago, that you've got to think of them as Earth's ultimate survivors because they've been through all 5 of Earth's major mass extinction events. And they're the only group of backboned animals on the planet to have that sort of title. So let's get started. So my new book documents the prehistory of sharks through time, with a few chapters at the end about living sharks and what's going on in the oceans with them today. So that's what we're going to cover in the talk today. So as I mentioned in the geohug introduction, I've been hooked on sharks as a boy since I was, well, 8 years of age. I found my first fossil when I was 7, but my first shark's tooth when I was about 8, from Beaumaris in Victoria, which is close to Melbourne. And you can find these beautiful fossil shark's teeth if you know what you're looking for by swimming around in the shallows. It's a Miocene age site. It's about 5 to 6 million years old. And that's a sketch from one of my science projects when I was in school, drawing the shark's teeth and looking at the serrations and so on. So I knew when I wanted to be, when I grew up, was a geologist or a paleontologist specializing in, fossils of fossil vertebrates. But we're talking about sharks today, so this give you a brief introduction to what sharks are. Well, clearly they're fishes, we all know that, but they're fishes that have a cartilaginous skeleton. They don't have bones inside them like bony fish do, like trout or marlin or goldfishes. And the modern sharks are divided into 3 main groups, which include things like the stingrays, the true sharks, and this strange group called the holocephalans, the ratfish and chimerids. So the sharks and the rays first diversified back in the Jurassic period, so they're relatively recent. But the chimerids, things like the elephant shark in Victoria, they diverged from the main line leading to sharks about 380 million years ago in the Devonian. And before that, we've got a very patchy record of sharks. what we call the stem sharks or stem chondrichthyans, which are a bunch of extinct groups that didn't really go anywhere, but they were part of that stepping stone up until we get to the modern sharks. And I'm going to talk about them first. But first of all, what exactly makes a shark? You know, look at this beautiful tiger shark here. You can see there's people in the background because if you go to the right places at the right time, you can actually be in the water with these tiger sharks and they won't actually be a danger to you. There's the cartilaginous skeleton of a mako shark. It looks a lot like bone, but it's not. It's actually a mineralized kind of cartilage. It creates great flexibility for the skeleton and also lightness. And this, I believe, is one of the great advantages that sharks have over other bony kinds of fish, because bone is a very energy hungry kind of tissue to develop, whereas cartilage is much easier to develop and lighter and more flexible. Sharks, of course, have tiny little scales in their skin. If you look at that tiger shark, you cannot physically see a scale with your eye because they're about, you know, 1/5 of a millimeter in size. Some of them maybe up to 1/2 millimeter or something like that. But they have ribbing or ridges on them, which actually helps to streamline the shark going through the water. The shark skin wetsuits, swimsuits of the Olympics that Michael Phelps won 9 gold medals wearing these special shark skin swimsuits that were then banned. They actually cut the drag in the water by up to 28%, giving a hugely unfair advantage for people wearing those kinds of swimsuits. And they got it all from studying shark scales. That's where this whole technology, which has now been economically applied to making films that can go over boats and aeroplanes to cut the drag and save the fuel and emissions and so on. So let's go back to the oldest known record of sharks anywhere in the world. And guess what? They come from Australia. They come from the Larapintine Sea of the Otodus of Central Australia, not far from Alice Springs. I've been to this site. It's the Stairway Sandstone. And by collecting some soft friable sandstones from this layer and dissolving them and breaking them up, you can get these tiny little scales out, which are, you know, 50 microns or so. A bit later in the Ordovician, we get more complex types of scales appearing in the Ordovician of North America with more ridges on them, but still that's all we have of sharks. And the question everyone asks is, how do we know they're sharks? Well, these kinds of scales are closer to living sharks than any other kind of fish. So that's how we know they're on the line to sharks, but we can't say they're definite sharks for sure. At the end of the Ordovician, we have a great diversity of different kinds of scales and more complexity in the tissues evolving. So it's kind of like if we were studying cakes and all we had were crumbs. If we had crumbs of these earliest sharks, they're very simple, like sponge cake crumbs. But by the end of the Ordovician, they're like black forest cake crumbs. They're far more complicated. Here's an idea that they could have even evolved from jawless fishes called phelodonts, because they have a bony base, a dentine crown, and a pulp cavity. And the only thing they're missing are neck canals, which is a feature that living sharks have with their scales, but we don't see them in these jawless fish. But otherwise, they're histologically, the tissues are very similar, that it's quite possible sharks could have evolved from early jawless fishes that had these similar kinds of scales. So most of us that study geology know there was the first of the 5 mass extinction events happened at the end of the Ordovician, 443 to 445 million years ago, which came in 2 pulses. There was a massive anoxic event. There was lots of ice caps forming at the poles, a cooling event. The shallowing of the seaways caused devastation in marine communities. One of the papers I was involved in with Ross Large at the University of Tasmania and a bunch of other geochemists and scientists from around the world was mapping the selenium in the ocean, which, as you can see from the graph on the left here, which was in our paper published in 2016, the orange is the oxygen levels and the dark blue with the red diamonds is the selenium levels. And they drop and coincide with these 2 pulses of the Ordovician extinction event. So we think the trace element collapse in the ocean might have also been one of the many factors contributing to this major mass extinction event. So that's in Gondwana Research, 2016, if anyone wants to look up the paper. And here we go across the Ordovician to Silurian boundary. And again, we don't have much of sharks in the Silurian. We have mostly scales. We have some fin spines. They're on the right. And there's one or two fairly complete stem sharks, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But fundamentally, what you can see from that diagram, published in PLOS One by Plum and Andreev, I think that one's from about 2020 or something, that there was a great increase in the numbers and diversity of shark types known from their micro remains. So these are some of these very strange looking stem sharks called acanthodians. And quite recently, there was a bunch of 4 papers published in Nature, all in the one issue in September 2022, showing the remains of the earliest shark-like creatures that are known from more than just scales. So very big spines sticking out everywhere, some tooth-like tooth whorls there. There's just a couple of these early stem sharks. So like living sharks, they have very small scales in the body, and they have similar fin spines with dentine and very dense tissues. And we have one actual small complete shark. It's called Xenocanthus, but it's strange because it's got bony plates covering the head, but otherwise the fin spines are identical more to sharks than to any other kind of fish. It's still a bit of a mystery where this fish fits in because it's only known from an impression in the rocks. It's not known from any actual tissue remains like actual teeth or bones. And there's the issue of Nature if anyone wants to look at these papers. This is a bit more complex, but all I'm trying to show is that we had these earlier types of jawed fish called placoderms, which had armored plates around their bodies. Dunkleosteus is an example of one of those. But from those came 2 main groups of fishes, the bony fishes, which led to the things like trout today, and the shark-like fishes, which include a whole mass of these stem chondrichthyans that are now extinct. And then the crown sharks, or the group leading to modern sharks, really appears quite late in geological time, not until about the Upper Devonian, which is really quite remarkable. They're one of the most recent groups of the modern fish groups to appear in their modern sort of lineage, but compared to all the others go back way further in time. So this is from one of those papers by Plum and Andreev published in Nature in 2022. Now we get on to the real sharks that are on the line to living sharks. And pretty soon you'll start seeing things that look very sharky. But the first thing we get of sharks that are on the modern line are teeth. What's so special about sharks' teeth? If you've ever seen a shark jaw, you'll see they have lots of different rows of teeth. And they're developing teeth all through their lifetime, and they shed those teeth on a regular basis. Something like our grey nurse shark or sand tiger shark, for example, can shed a tooth once every 2 days. We know this because they're kept in aquaria, and so that people can actually see how many teeth they're shedding each week. So this tooth, which comes from Spain, from the early Devonian, about 415 to 418 million years ago, called Leonodus, is the first example of a modern type of shark's tooth with a root that indicates that there was a file of teeth growing in a row and they were shedding their teeth on a regular basis. There's also experiments happening in the Middle Devonian, all sorts of shark-like creatures that aren't on the line to living sharks. And these occur in South of Africa and Bolivia. They have the same type of complex cartilage that living sharks have. You can see by the dimples on this shark on the left, it's called globular calcified cartilage. So unlike the cartilage in our ears or our nose, which is quite soft and flexible, this is cartilage strengthened by phosphatic minerals that makes it quite rigid, almost like bone, but it's a completely different tissue from bone. So it gives it strength and rigidity. Then we start getting lots of shark's teeth in the fossil record from about the late part of the Upper Devonian, the late part of the early Devonian right through the Devonian period. Sharks just start going berserk. We get a great diversity of them suddenly appearing. Some of these teeth are very complex with many different cusps. Here's one from Australia that my group studied new specimens we collected from the South Blue Range in Victoria near Mansfield. And it's the first record of any shark's tooth that has a serrated cutting edge on it. So it's got these quite complex flat teeth with cutting edges. indicating sharks were attacking prey bigger than themselves, probably because having a serrated tooth makes you a super predator. You're capable of attacking something much larger or as large as yourself to cut chunks out of it, kind of thing, rather than just catching small fish with spindly teeth. Sharks up until this point in time are really tiny. They're only about 20 to 30 centimeters in length. And this tooth is one I found in Antarctica in 1992. I talk about it in the first 2 pages of my new shark book, from Portal Mountain in Antarctica. And these teeth are huge. They're up to 25 millimeters, maybe some of them 30 millimeters high, an inch in height. So we're looking at sharks going from 30 centimeters in size to something maybe 3 meters, maybe 4 meters in length by the Middle Devonian. The interesting thing is too that all these previous forms are sort of found in shallow marine environments. South Blue Range, we're starting to get freshwater environments, and in Antarctica, freshwater environments. So sharks were now beginning to leave the oceans and invade the freshwater rivers as well. Here's some of the specimens from Antarctica. Antarctilamna was a first fossil shark known from a complete brain case. That's it there in the middle, found by Gavin Young on his expedition down there in 1971. And that's me at the top right, going back to those same layers and collecting more different kinds of fossil sharks from those same layers of the Aztec siltstone. It's amazing in Antarctica because those of you that have been there will understand this. There's no plants or soil, just beautiful layers of outcrop. And when you get a mountain range sticking up above the ice caps, then you've got just pure outcrop of rock. So you can see all the geological features. You can measure the layers centimeter by centimeter, which is what we did, making measured geological sections. We climbed mountains and went to areas that no one had ever been to before on one of those expeditions in 1992. So we got to find many new fossil sites there, which was fantastic. So by the late Devonian, we're getting some pretty nice fossil sites found in North America. The Cleveland Shale of Ohio, for example, close to the Devonian Carboniferous boundary. We're talking about 361 to 359 million years ago. And we get these beautiful fossils of almost complete sharks. Here's one called Cladosolaki. But these sharks were only small. They're about 3 to 4 feet, 1.4 meters in length. And they lived in the shadows of these really large, monstrous placoderms like Dunkleosteus that had armored plates covering the head and the trunk. Thought to be up to 6 meters in length. Other scientists scale them down to about 4.5 meters. But either way, they were big top-end predators living in these oceans. Sharks weren't top dogs at this time. The interesting thing is these things look exactly like living sharks. You can see the dorsal fins, they've got spines, they've got broad triangular fins. But when we study their anatomy, we would learn they're not really on the line going to living sharks. They're a divergent group going on the line leading to holocephalans, to spookfishes and ratfishes. So at this stage, they don't represent a shark that's on the line to the evolution of living sharks. This guy is an amazing scientist. And throughout my book, I talk about people and human stories as well. Some of the amazing paleontologists that studied these early fossil sharks. This guy was an absolute genius. His name was Bashford Dean. He held 3 positions at the same time. Imagine this. He was a professor at Columbia University teaching ichthyology and anatomy and stuff. He was the curator at the Natural History Museum in New York, American Museum of Natural History, in charge of fishes and sharks. And he was also curator in charge of armor and armory at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, because he had a hobby collecting armor, medieval armor. And he did amazing work studying both placoderms, armored fishes, armor, and sharks, and did amazing, great work. He built this amazing gallery, the first one ever to tell the history of the evolution of fishes in a museum in America, but he died the day before it opened due to a botched operation. And it's just one of the many stories I tell in the book. Exciting discoveries of fossil sharks from the Devonian age are coming out of Morocco. And I'm talking a whole suite of papers published only in the last 4 or 5 years, where they're finding whole complete sharks with 3-dimensional preservation, where you can scan the nodule that the shark's in using CT scanning or synchrotron, and then reconstruct in 3D the shape of the head, the brain case, the internal cavities showing the shape of the brain, and even look at the jaw mechanics of how their mouth opens and closes. And what we're finding is these are not true sharks. They're shark-like, but again, they're on that lineage leading to holocephalans. Some of them, like this one, Magriba salaki, had wide nostrils, broad, across the head. It's almost like a shark trying to devolve into the first hammerhead kind of sharks back in the Devonian. I found a shark up at Gogo, which is the site in the Kimberley, Gogo Station, the Gogo Formation, late Devonian. I've been working this site since 1986, my first expedition up there. And up until this point in 2005, when I found this nodule, no sharks had ever been found in that fauna. We'd found 50 different kinds of fishes, but no sharks. This was the first one. And as you can see, I was able to etch the cartilage jaw bones out of the limestone. And in doing that, we also found lots of other remains. We found beautiful teeth, we found scales, we found parts of the shoulder girdle, parts of the other parts of the skeleton. And what it revealed is something truly outstanding that none of us expected to find. When we looked at the microstructure of the cartilage under the synchrotron and also in thin section, we're able to determine that there were bone cells, osteocytes, between the layers of cartilage. So that sharks had a lot more bone in their skeleton in their early days, but they were losing it as they developed their own special kind of cartilage that would then become unique to sharks and no other animal group. We published this in PLOS One in 2015, and that paper's open access if anyone wants to look it up. The commonest shark in the Devonian, though, is this shark called Phoebodus, and there's a whole complete one found in Morocco from the Maidair Basin. But from teeth alone, we also have many species of Phoebodus, and it's been used in geological problem solving by because its age range of all the different species are quite narrow. So, you know, if you don't have access to good conodonts, or you have these sharks can often be in different environments where the zone fossils in the marine limestones aren't so good, you can actually use the shark's teeth to determine the age of the layers from drill core even. So they're very useful for biostratigraphy. And this, unlike all those other sharks I just showed you, is a true shark on the line to living sharks. So it's got completely different anatomical features of its brain case. And I won't bore you with that kind of anatomy because, you know, we'll just move on with the story quickly. So before I finish with the Devonian, how did the battle for the Devonian finish? We have like these armored placoderms, like the Panzer division of fishes in the Devonian seas, the armor-plated placoderms of many different kinds. And they simply took over the niches before sharks could really start diversifying. So they occupied many different kinds of feeding niches in the Devonian seas, especially around reefs, like up in the Kimberley. And these are the beautiful three-dimensional specimens that you can get from, you find them in these like nodules, like here's a go-go nodule, and then you can put them in acid, weak acetic acid, dissolve the rock, and the bone will come out. You can then build a skeleton up like building an airplane model, you know, with glue. So many different kinds of placoderms from Gogo, and they simply diversified much earlier than sharks. So sharks were left with not many niches to go into until right at the end of the Devonian. Now, some new discoveries, some of them haven't even been published yet, but I know they're on the verge of being published very soon. So I have permission from the authors to sort of talk about this material. But one of the big discoveries from Morocco recently was a giant set of jaws of a very big shark. We're talking the lower jaws about 70 centimeters or 80 centimeters in length when it was complete. And we're talking of a shark that was probably 6 to 7 meters in length, bigger than any placoderm we know of. And the other thing that's really interesting is when you look at the recent literature of the diversity of sharks, we find that right before the end of the Devonian, before that mass extinction event called the Hangenberg event, we actually have a higher diversity of sharks than placoderms. So there were two mass extinction events at the end of the Devonian, the Kellavasser event at the end of the Franian, about 372 million years ago, which wiped out a lot of placoderms or decreased their diversity, but they still kept going to the end of the Devonian. But at that point, sharks started diversifying rapidly. And they actually overtook placoderms just before the end of the close of the Devonian. Devonian extinctions are a whole cluster bomb of different environmental factors. 4 biotic crises, the Taganic event, the Fran event, the Kellerwasser, and the Hangenberg, all during peak low selenium levels, again in our paper of 2016. We also had massive volcanic eruptions, the Vila traps. We had anoxic basins, a lot of anoxia talked about in the late Devonian. So all of these different events caused mass extinctions on a grand scale, and it wiped out the placoderms. They just didn't survive the Devonian, along with many other early groups of armored fishes, like armored jawless fishes and other kinds of bony fishes that didn't make it through. So big extinction event here. And after that, sharks had a free rein to just really diversify and take off. So in a nutshell, up until this point, nearly all the sharks we're looking at are not real sharks. They're sharks on the line to holocephalans or ratfish. And the sharks leading to the modern sharks, we've only really met a couple of them so far in this lecture, the Otodus and the giant jaws from Morocco, the Tenecanthus. Right. So in the early Carboniferous, sharks took over the oceans and rivers of the world. They were the dominant fishes in our oceans anywhere on the planet. So today, for example, if we look at our oceans, we see there's over 30,000 species of bony fish, but about 1,200 species of sharks, rays, and chimerids. So they're very much in the minority. But back in the early Carboniferous, sharks were more abundant, more dominant than even the bony fishes. So they ruled the oceans and rivers of the world. And we have some truly extraordinary sites with perfectly preserved complete sharks. So here's a specimen here showing a male below with a dorsal fin spine, the female biting the male. We know the lower one's the male because he has clasping organs on the pelvic fins for mating. And this is actually a pair of sharks caught about to mate that were fossilized by a massive dump of sediment and buried from a site called Bear Gulch in Montana, early Carboniferous, about 320 million years ago. And from the same seas in Montana, you see this, this beautiful artistic reconstruction on the right, showing some of the bizarre, wacko, weirdo sharks that lived at the time. I won't go through them all here. They're all in the book and they're all explained, and all these funny mouths and strange wings coming out the back of their heads. They were just totally wacky, but they occupied many niches and dominated the seas at the time. Here's a few examples of some of those beautiful fossils preserved from Bear Gulch, from rapid burials of sediment flows in a basin. And Dick Lund, who's the paleontologist up there, 50 years going back to the same site every year with teams of volunteers, splitting rock, finding more and more and more. He's now uncovered something like 150 species of fossil fish from this site, of which more than 80 of them belong to the sharks and shark-like fishes. Scotland is also an amazing place. It's got some fantastic fossil sharks in the Carboniferous, especially around Edinburgh and Glasgow, just around the big towns. In a suburb of Glasgow called Bear's Den, this beautiful complete shark was found by Stan Wood, local fossil collector. It's called the Bear's Den shark. It's had poems written about it. And you'll see it's got this remarkable dorsal fin spine made of bony, dense, bony-like tissues. It's actually a concentrated form of dentine, and tooth-like structures on top of it. So maybe for ballast or streamlining, but we really don't know what the purpose of this thing was for. Could be for sexual attraction. Males and females might have had slightly different shapes or whatever, but so far it hasn't really been worked out. But this shark was about 1 meter in length, and it had very sharp teeth, had a gut full of shrimp, so we know what it ate. And it's really quite a remarkable fossil shark. And that's what it looked like. It's called Acmenistian. When I wrote my book, I actually commissioned an artist to do 15 new artistic reconstructions of these ancient sharks. And this is one of those many new reconstructions that are shown in the book. Right. And this is the incredible amateur paleontologist, Stan Wood, who found many of these fossil sites around Scotland. There were a lot of sites that were lost that were known in the 17 and 18 sort of hundreds. and then their actual details of exactly where these layers were had been lost. He went back and rediscovered a lot of them and made these remarkable discoveries just from sheer hard work, going there layer by layer, digging and digging, digging till he found the right layers with the fossils. One of the fossils he found, a shark called Tristichius. Again, this shows how paleontology has advanced a lot since my days as a student at Monash University, when all we had was a microscope and a pick to look at things. Now we've got synchrotrons, we've got neutron beams at ANSTO, and you can do this remarkable CT work on the skulls while they're still in the rock. You don't even have to prepare them out, and even make movies of them opening and closing their jaws with animation and so on. And it showed they had quite specialized feeding mechanisms, that this particular shark from the Wardy site around Edinburgh actually had a suction pump mechanism in its mouth. So it could go up to a shrimp hiding in a crevice in a reef and open its mouth and suck that shrimp into its gut, just by the suction power of developing this specialized anatomy of the gill arches of the head. This is something that bony fish do, but sharks were doing it 50 million years earlier than they developed that same ability. This is only a recent discovery, shows that sharks are not as primitive as we used to think, that they actually advanced many different anatomical features for feeding well before the other groups of fishes did. And that's what Tristichius looked like. This is a first shark that I've introduced in this talk so far that's on the line leading to true sharks. It's actually one of the sharks that is almost like the Port Jackson shark living today. It's very, very similar. The coelacanths were the first truly gigantic sharks. So that set of jaws I showed you from Morocco. We also had sharks in the early Carboniferous with teeth the size of your hand, that probably growing to 8 meters in length. So we're getting the first truly mega predatory sharks living in our oceans at that time. Not just teeth, we've got giant brain cases of them found in sites in Texas that also indicate sharks in the order of 8 meters in length. And we have complete fossils of them from sites in New Mexico. And there's one of them, and one of the new reconstructions in the book of a thing called Dracopristis. This was a much smaller one, only about 2 meters in length, but nonetheless, it shows what these predatory coelacanth sharks were like. Finally, some of the weird and wacky kinds of shark's teeth we find in the early Carboniferous. Most of these belong to the holocephalin group. There was a great radiation of them in the Carboniferous, and then they dwindled after the Permian extinction event, which I'll talk about later. But all sorts of weird and wacky types of teeth, blunt brick-like teeth for crushing shells and things, single rows of sharp serrated teeth, and I'll talk about them in a minute, the buzzsaw sharks. And sometimes sharks with just 2 or 3 big teeth in their jaws were highly specialized, like for picking clams or a certain type of prey. This tooth at the top here represents a holocephalin with crushing tooth plates. And below it is a lungfish jaw from Gogo with crushing tooth plates. And you can see how immediately after these marine lungfish died out at the end of the Devonian, these holocephalins came in and were feeding on the same sorts of prey with the same kind of jaw structure. It's really quite a remarkable example of, adaptive evolution, parallel evolution, where one group replaces the niche of another group, like wolves and thylacines looking identical, but really having quite distant ancestries. In the early Carboniferous, we're also getting the first evidence of sharks that may have had electroreception. So modern sharks all have electroreceptive cells in their heads, so they can detect the electric field of a living prey that might be buried below the surface. And this shark from the Mason Creek fauna in the United States, called Badranga, had a big flat paddle like the Mississippi polyodon, the paddlefish, which uses its paddle to fill it with electroreceptors, and then it can detect clouds of plankton in the water, not just living fish buried below the sea level, buried below the sand, but also clouds of plankton in the water column. They can detect the electric fields of that plankton using these types of snouts. So this is quite a remarkable fossil discovery. And the rivers of both the Carboniferous and the Permian were dominated by these sharks called xenocanths, with very strange neck spines sticking out the back of their neck, and a very long dorsal fin. Very peculiar body shape and very specialized kind of teeth that are double pronged, as you can see in the mouth of this shark called Orthocanthus. So they were about 2 to 3 meters in length on average, but some of them were up to 5 or 6 meters in length, really gigantic forms with tiny little teeth that may have been filter feeders. We even have the first evidence of shark cannibals occurring in the Permian, where we get xenocanth species eating each other and xenocanth sharks eating other xenocanth sharks. The last of the xenocanths, by the way, you can see in the Australian Museum in Sydney if you go into the displays, and you'll see this shark there from the Upper Triassic of Sydney called Moriodontus. And that was the very last of these xenocanth sharks that went extinct in the end of the Triassic. Before I leave the Paleozoic, I have to talk about the buzzsaw sharks. They're such exciting and bizarre kinds of sharks. They were first discovered, this thing called Helicoprion, actually from Western Australia, from the Arthur River in the Pilbara. And you see this sketch in the middle is a series of teeth with serrations that was found. It's actually the holotype of Helicoprion, which is better known from these beautiful complete tooth whorls found in Russia by Alexander Karpinski, a great geologist, and also from different sites in North America around Idaho especially. Karpinski is one of the hero geologists of the shark book that I tell his life story in it. He rose to become one of the greatest scientists of all Russia. First of all, he set out to map nearly the whole geology of Russia single-handedly, and he was responsible for doing detailed biostratigraphic work, working across all fossil groups, from microfossils to algae to plants to sharks to you name it, ammonites, whatever. So when the Bolshevik Revolution came in 1917, he was very close friends with the Tsar, and he knew a lot of the royal family. Everybody thought he'd probably be put up against a wall and shot, but instead he was elected president of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and he went on to lead the new regime of Russia into a new scientific program for the 20th century. He's the only, when he died in the 1930s, he's the only paleontologist to be buried in the Kremlin wall in the necropolis. That's how much they thought of him. So a great human story. His whole career is detailed in the book. He was professor of the geology and mines in Russia and had many great positions. But where did these coily tooth whorls, no one knew how they fitted onto a shark. Karpinski's early reconstructions here had them coming off the nose like a giant marine elephant that would slash down at its prey. Later on, he changed his ideas and thought they came from the lower jaw. This was verified quite recently by CT scanning of blocks that contain the tooth whorls of these sharks found in the Phosphoria mines of Idaho. Now, at the time, they thought they were just fossils of the tooth whorls, but when you put them through the synchrotron and you can image the cartilage inside the rock, you can see the remains of the brain case and the jaw cartilages here in green and blue and red. And from that, they could reconstruct that this was embedded into the lower jaw as a single row of teeth that was sort of exposing just the sharpest, oldest teeth at the front. This was a specialized feeder that probably ate cephalopods like squid, not even ammonites. We think, well, maybe, you know, if it was crushing ammonite shells with this single blade of teeth, there'd be wear on the teeth, but there's no wear on any of these teeth. And the scientists that did this study have seen tens of thousands of individual Helicoprion teeth, can't find wear on any of them. So at the end of the Permian, oh, I forgot to mention one thing about Helicoprion. It was gigantic. Some of these tooth whorls are 2/3 of a meter across, and the shark itself would have been 8 to 10 meters in length. So we're getting to the largest shark of all time from this point in the talk. End Permian, the great dying 252 million years ago, 81 to 96% of all species on Earth go extinct. No, marine habitats, I mean, were hit the hardest. These Siberian traps, massive volcanic eruptions, released up to 12,000 gigatons of CO2, causing euxenia, high hydrogen sulfide levels in the oceans, high water temperatures, highly acidic seas, accelerated warming effects. So many of the shark groups went extinct at this time, those weirdos with the strange teeth. Many other groups in the marine realm went extinct as well, especially the invertebrates, but I won't go into that. But the sharks leading on the line to true sharks, which we call the coelacanths, they just sailed through this unaffected. Why? Maybe because they were diversifying into deep water environments at the time. It was really the shallow seaways that were hammered the hardest. And that's where these specialized sharks with these specialized teeth for eating clams and things were mostly living. Now, in the Jurassic, I'm jumping ahead of myself here, we get another anoxic event in the oceans, two pulses causing icehouse events that rapidly turned to a warming event triggered by volcanic eruptions. And the release of deep sea methane clathrates raised temperatures quickly and caused more euxinia and oxia plus sulfidic seas. Again, shallow marine habitats were hammered. Marine faunas hit harshly, especially brachiopods, ostracods, some ammonoids. But this modern shark group, which we're now going to call the neo-coelacanths, they went through unaffected and actually diversified. So many groups of sharks appear at this time, about 183 million years ago, that are going to go and evolve into the living sharks we have today. And this is the first point in this entire talk that we're getting the beginnings of the living shark fauna sort of appearing in a rudimentary form. And I'll move pretty quickly here. This is brilliant work done by my colleague at Birkbeck College in London called Charlie Underwood. One group of sharks that dominated after the Permian extinctions were called hybodonts. And a feature of them was after this devastating mass extinction event, for about 140 million years after, sharks were mostly small. They shrunk. The average size of sharks was a meter or less. There were one or two exceptions, maybe 2 meters in length, maybe slightly bigger, but I'd say 99% of all sharks in the Triassic and for the most of the Jurassic were fairly small. So these little hybodonts were, I call them the Swiss Army knife sharks of the oceans, because they had not just a tooth for one kind of food, but a whole range of teeth, sharp pointed teeth at the front, flat crushing teeth at the back. So they had like a Swiss Army knife dentition to eat a whole range of different diets. And that's probably why they survived the next event, which was the end Triassic extinction event. Another one of the heroes in the book is this guy called Arthur Smith Woodward, who worked at the British Museum of Natural History, published his first scientific paper at age 14, and his last 4 years after he died. That's like 70 years of publications. Over 725 published papers. He named over 300 species and over 100 different kinds of sharks. And he specialized in these hybodonts, where he did brilliant work, actually correctly denoting the right species where previous work had made hundreds of different species, and he sort of collapsed them into the right numbers of species and so on. Again, one of the most important people in the world of fossil sharks. He only took half a day off work in 40 years working at the British Museum of Natural History because he broke his arm. So again, another great story in there about a very dedicated scientist. And speaking of scientists, let's talk about Mary Anning for just a minute. She's often thought of as this very famous fossil collector from the Lyme Regis area back in the 1830s, 1820s, who collected brilliant fossils and sold them to the British Museum and to other collections. People just think of her as a preparator and a fossil collector. But I found in digging in the literature that she actually published a single authored peer-reviewed paper on sharks, on fossil shark Otodus. And to me, that qualifies her as a paleontologist. Not only that, but many of her discoveries were the basis of very important works on these marine reptiles, ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs. She even had a fossil shark named after her, one of these hybodont species as well. So during the end of the Triassic and beginning of the Jurassic, we start getting the rise of the neo-coelacanths, the modern sharks. Now, not all of them look like sharks today. Some of them, like this little one from Italy, from near Milan, actually look more like a marlin, like a swordfish. It's the only shark we know of in the fossil record that may have also had electric capabilities of generating electric shocks or using electric fields to communicate, not just, the normal electrosensory cells embedded in the skin. So today, for example, we know electric rays can emit a powerful electric shock that can stun or kill their prey or deter their attackers. And this little shark from Italy, only about 25 centimeters in length, had a very special shaped body, and anal fin especially, that resembles fish called gymnotiforms that live in South America in the Amazon rivers. They can also generate electric pulses by rippling of the muscles in a certain way. So it's quite likely this was the only shark capable of generating electric shocks. And it's done magnificent work by a British paleontologist called Chris Duffin. So in Triassic event, we're up to number 4 of the mass extinction events, 201 million years ago. We know this was probably triggered by the Central Atlantic volcanic province, massive eruptions, again, the same old story, high greenhouse emissions, high levels of euxinia and acidic oceans. Marine life got culled. Conodonts went extinct. Many groups of ammonites went extinct. Many groups of marine reptiles went extinct, leaving just the dolphin-like ichthyosaurs and the long-necked plesiosaurs as the main reptiles in our oceans in the Jurassic. Many groups of sharks die out at this time, but the basal Neocoelacanth groups and the hybodonts passed right through. Now, Jurassic shark. Now things get interesting because we start seeing sharks that look very much like the living sharks of today. Take, for example, this shark in the bottom right. This is a kind of ancient Port Jackson shark, Heterodontus. It's even got the same genus name as the living Port Jackson shark. So it's, when we think of living fossils, we should be thinking of things like the Port Jackson shark, where the same genus goes back 150 million years unchanged. This is not like coelacanths, because we think of coelacanths as living fossils, but the genus Latimeria doesn't go back in the fossil record very far at all. So we're just talking about the group coelacanths. I'm talking about a genus like Homo sapiens, the human. Homo is the genus, right? So the genus Heterodontus is the longest living ancient genus of vertebrate alive on the planet. I cannot think of another example of a living genus that goes back this far to the Jurassic period unchanged. So we have a seas here full of many kinds of sharks. Some of them are archaic forms that are stragglers from, early experiments, but we're starting to see a lot more of the living shark fauna appear. The first of the lamniforms, which are a group containing the white sharks, the thresher sharks, the mako sharks, and the base-king sharks appears here. Angel sharks looking exactly like angel sharks today. We're getting dogfish-like things. We're getting Port Jackson sharks. And one of the biggest transformations in the history of sharks happens in the Jurassic. It's the beginning of the rays. So it happened at the same time as dinosaurs evolved into birds on land. So imagine dinosaurs are running with their hind legs, powering them forward, and then they suddenly switch to getting bigger and bigger arms with feathers that then switch to flight. So it's a locomotory transition from going from your hind legs powering you along to your arms powering you along through flight. The exact same thing happened in the water with sharks. They went from having powerful tails pushing them through the water to expanding their pectoral fins as wings so they could fly through the water, powered by their pectoral fins or wings, but not by their tails. Why would they do this? Only one reason in evolution anything does anything, because it's more efficient. It uses less energy. And if you use less energy, you need less food, less resources to survive. Rays are the stars of the shark story. Today, they outnumber the sharky sharks as the most dominant and successful group of the shark group, even though they're flattened and we call them rays. They're just a specialized group of sharks. And these are some examples of those early rays. The guitarfish, the rhinobatids, evolved in the Jurassic, and they look exactly like that today. But rays are also highly specialized with their domed flat teeth, which are highly distinctive in the fossil record. And even from these tiny little teeth, only a fraction of a millimeter long, we can identify them as ancient rays. In the mid-Cretaceous, we had the first large predatory sharks appearing since the end Permian extinctions. And this is the first of many that you'll see. It was found by my good friend Michael Siverson at the West Australian Museum from Cartilaginous Station in West Australia. So he named it Cartilaginos, tooth from Cartilaginous, species name Ricci after the station manager, Rick French. And it's known from not only these beautiful teeth associated with a whole dentition, but also from vertebrae, these big ossified backbones. When I say ossified, I really mean they're not quite full of bone, but they're hardened with phosphate. These sharks were growing up to 8 meters in length. And so we're getting the start of really large predatory sharks again in our oceans. One of the most beautiful examples of a big predatory shark, I went to Italy, to the Lacini Mountains, where you can go to a little museum high up in the mountains there, the Santa Anna da Fado Museum in northern Italy, where there are slabs of limestone laid out with 6-meter sharks just preserved in them, with the backbones and the teeth all preserved. And this one here, actually called Otodus, which may have grown as large as 11 meters in length, actually had a whole 2-meter turtle in its belly. And we know that it swallowed that turtle. It wasn't just a fossil that, you know, died next to it, because it's got one of its teeth stuck in the shell of the turtle. So you can see some amazing examples of fossils in these little museums in northern Italy, about 90 million years ago in the late mid-Cretaceous boundary time. And there's the turtle skeleton in the belly of this shark. There's a picture of the museum. There's another kind of shark there called Cretoxyrhina. And this has got smooth, sharp, cutting teeth, like many of the lamina, port beagle, salmon sharks of today. It probably was in the order of 6 to 8 meters in length. And it was not too dissimilar from the kind of great white-like sharks we have around today, but not related to the white shark at all. I'll talk about that in a bit. Sharks had a lot to contend with in the Mesozoic era. They didn't have it easy. There were lots of big, ferocious marine reptiles around, not just big pliosaurs with big, long crocodile-like heads like Kronosaurus, but also the mosasaurs towards the end of the Cretaceous. First, when they appeared, they were small, only 4 or 5 meters, and the sharks were actually bigger than them. But very quickly, the mosasaurs got gigantic, up to 20 meters in length, where the sharks were no bigger than 5 to 6 meters by that stage in their evolution. They actually shrunk a little. And the marine reptiles rule the seas. But it's not just all about big sharks. We get some beautiful fossil deposits in the late Cretaceous of Lebanon, where we have whole, complete, perfect fossil sharks preserved. And what these are telling us is that all the modern groups of sharks were appearing, all the little catfishes, the epaulette sharks, the bamboo sharks, many of the reef sharks of today. So we're starting to get a great diversity of the modern shark families established by the end of the Mesozoic. Sand tiger sharks like the grey nurse, like even had some quite gigantic forms, like this form called Leptostyrax, where the teeth can be up to sort of 5 or 6 centimeters in height. But we also had some very weirdos. This shark called Otodus is only known from these crushing teeth until a couple of years ago. People used to think it was a gigantic ray, for example. We didn't really know where it fitted in the shark family tree. But as my book was going to print, I literally had to stop the presses because a paper came out showing this truly remarkable fossil site in Mexico with whole complete skeletons of Otodus preserved. There's one there with the teeth all in position. And it showed something we never expected, that this was actually a lamniform related to like the white sharks, a fast swimming shark with mouths full of crushing teeth, probably for hunting turtles and ammonites. And so that's what we've learned about that shark. A dead end lineage, they didn't go anywhere. They died out at the end of the Cretaceous. How did the end Cretaceous extinctions affect sharks? Well, there's been a lot published on it, and we see a decline of about 62% of species that didn't make it through that boundary, especially those that lived on bottom food, like durophages that ate shellfish and clams and things like that. about 72% of those died out, including all those hybridonts that were the dominant small sharks of the Mesozoic era. This is from a paper that's only recently been published, I think. I reviewed it, showing that the modern neosalarkians of today achieved their biodiversity that is in their seas today by about 110 million years ago, back in the Albian, the early Cretaceous. And that's the same diversity as they're at today. But they kept growing and diversifying right through to the Eocene about 50 million years ago, when sharks reached their peak of all-time diversity, double what it is today. So at least 2,500 species of sharks in our oceans at that time, sharks and their kin, of course, compared to about 1,200 species today. Ever since then, they've been on the decline due to various events that have happened during the Cenozoic, like the rise of whales and penguins and various other marine groups that were competing for the same resources. Declined. We have one really exceptional fossil site in northern Italy, at Montebolca, and you can see these specimens in the Natural History Museum in Verona. They're some of the most beautiful examples of complete fossil sharks and rays you'll see anywhere in the world, even with the color banding preserved. See the black spots on the tips of these tails of some of these reef sharks. And this is an electric ray, a torpedo ray, perfectly preserved, whose belly was full of a food source we never thought rays would eat, because they don't eat them today. This particular type of shark ate forams, benthic foraminifera. Its gut was just full of them. The big difference between the Cretaceous period sharks and the modern sharks of the Cenozoic is a changing of the guard, where the lamniform sharks that include the relatives of the threshers and great whites and makos were the dominant sharks of the Cretaceous. There was over 100 species of them in the Cretaceous period. But then they suffered a changing of the guard as the carcharinids, the whalers, the bull sharks, took over and started to rise and displace them. So today, for example, we only have 15 species of the lamniforms left, including the white shark, the basking shark, etc. But we have nearly 300 species of these carcharinids, which include most of our reef sharks, our tiger sharks, our hammerhead sharks, and our very small sharks like collared cat sharks, and all of those kinds of sharks that live in the mesopelagic zone, 200 to 600 meters down in those, very small kite fin sharks and things like that. All sorts of other different kinds of sharks. But the rise of the biggest predator of all time really starts in the Paleocene, Eocene with this shark called Otodus obliquus, whose teeth are quite large. They can be up to 7 or 8 centimeters in height. They're quite big. And it's a typical lamniform shark, just like modern lamna, but it was probably up to about 8 to 9 meters in length. Finding the beginning of the lineage leading to the megalodon was a great mystery, but it was solved by my friend David Ward, and I tell his story in the book as well. He went to Kazakhstan, to the deserts, where the Russians had found a fossil site that had teeth that some of them were serrated and some of them were not serrated. The ones on the right here, bed 4, are serrated teeth, perfectly serrated, like you can see that. You get a partly serrated tooth, number 3, and a non-serrated teeth in beds 2. So David Ward, by digging out layer by layer by layer, actually found the transitional zone, a layer of about 4 million years of time, dated by biostratigraphy and other layers, that shows the going from Otodus obliquus to these species of Otodus that are heavily serrated. And from there, it's just an increase in size and a loss of serrations until you get to megalodon. And there's David in his study. Another interesting story, he started life as a vet. He set up a franchise of veterinary surgeries all around the UK. And then he could give up most of his time doing that sort of work and chase fossil shark's teeth for the rest of his life, go on expeditions. And since then, he's written over 100 scientific peer-reviewed papers in paleontology, even though he's an amateur, and he's contributed many wonderful specimens to museums and collections around the world. Let's talk about white sharks. White sharks are really interesting. People think they were the ancestor to megalodon ages ago, but they're not even closely related. We now know that these teeth I was collecting as a boy from Beaumaris, we used to call them Isurus histalis, thinking they were a mako shark, are the beginning of the white shark line, because all they have to do is develop these weak serrations through this intermediate species called Carcharodon hubbelli, and eventually end up with a fully serrated identical tooth that's the modern white shark. And they're known for more than teeth. This skeleton you see on the right is an articulated head, almost like a mummified head of this ancient white shark found in the Peruvian deserts. The full story of how it was found and its full significance is outlined in the book. But we even had other examples of giant predators, like giant thresher sharks up to 8 meters in length. Today, thresher sharks have these thick teeth with no serrations. But when you get to a certain size, serrations indicate you're probably hunting marine mammals like whales or giant sea cows. And these ancient thresher sharks were probably doing that rather than jumping out of the water with long tails. I have to talk a bit about Meg because everyone's fascinated by Megalodon. And up until my book, every single paper or book published on Megalodon thought of it as a giant white shark on steroids, like this very early image of it. This is Catalina Pimiento, who grew up in Bogota, Colombia. And it was a very dangerous place to live at the time, lots of kidnappings and bombings and murders going on. And I call her the queen of the megalodons, and she's happy with that title. She's the only person I know that's got 2 postgraduate degrees just on megalodon, a master's and a PhD. And much of her work is featured in the book. And she kindly reviewed my chapter on megalodon for me to make sure it was all accurate and up to date. So some of these teeth are gigantic. They get up to 18 centimeters in height. They're massively big. I showed you a megalodon tooth before, but here's one again. This one's only about, as I said, about 13 or 14 centimeters in length, but 18 centimeters is really, really big. We used to think they were up to about 18 meters in length, maximum size, but now all of that's changed due to recent publications that have just been published in the last year. And again, how do I get it into my book that was published in July last year? It was easy. At the time, I was interviewing all these scientists about picking their brains about Megalodon, and they told me about their work that was in press and about to come out, so they let me use it in the book. Unfortunately, that paper went through some heavy reviews and didn't come out till much later than they thought. So the paper was only published earlier this year by Stearns et al. How do we know Megalodon was really, really big? Well, we've got teeth like these jaws, but these jaws have been artificially reconstructed. The one on the left is just wrong. The jaws are way too big for the mouth. The one on the right in the New Caledonia Museum is probably more accurate. But in a museum in Belgium, we have a vertebral column of Megalodon with 144 vertebrae preserved. And from that, the scientists that published this paper this year determined that the tail is much longer than a white shark. Look, nothing like a white shark, more like a giant nurse shark. So I commissioned this new reconstruction of Megalodon by Julius Kostosny to show it with this long, slender looking appearance, nothing like even papers published last year are now completely out of date. By the same author, by the way, Stearns et al. Put out this bigger Stearns et al. Stretched out that earlier reconstruction by Jack Cooper, published in 2024, to this longer looking kind of body shape. But since then, based on the scales of Megalodon, they've made it looking more like a nurse shark with a longer, more slender body. Anyway, last thing I'm going to tell you about Megalodon is that it probably saved more human lives than it's ever taken. This is called a Natterzungen, or adder's tongue. It's a medieval piece of jewelry that has shark's teeth hanging from its this little tree. These are not Megalodon teeth on this one, but they often use Megalodon teeth on them. They were very prized. Why did they do this? Because you would be worried that your enemies would be trying to poison you at dinner parties. So when you got your goblet of wine, you dip it into the shark's tooth. And if the shark's tooth turned dark color, especially the clasps were made of silver, then there was probably arsenic in that wine. It was poisoned. So it actually, there's a paper written on this by Chris Duffin, about the medicinal uses of fossils in medieval times, where he talks about these natazangan as probably saving people's lives because they reacted, the silver clasp would react to the arsenic in the poison, the wine. The oldest evidence of a shark attack. This is an archaeological record of a victim from Japan, where the skeleton is shown. Clearly it's missing something. Spot the missing part. Yes, this guy lost his leg in the shark attack, and there's all sorts of other scars on the bones, but he didn't die. He lived to a ripe old age and was buried in a cemetery. And so there's a quite remarkable archaeological paper here about the world's first recorded shark attack. And finally, I'll finish up by just talking a little bit about modern sharks. When I got the contract to write this book, I promised both my agent and my publisher I would go diving with white sharks. And I was terrified, but I summed up the courage and I went aboard the HMS Rodney Fox in 2023. And I was able to go down and observe these beautiful sharks in the wild. And it's honestly, it's one of the most incredible things you can ever do. Here's a video. You won't hear the music because I haven't turned the sound on, but it's actually to a Lou Reed tune. And there's the shark, and they're just right there in front of you. You can just, I was in the cage for 2 hours and I photographed lots of sharks. And over the course of 4 days, I saw about 7 or 8 different white sharks. And I got to have a great respect for them and appreciation of how beautiful they really are in the wild. Did you know that there's only one recorded example of white sharks killing a baleen whale, a humpback whale? This was published in 2017 based on a humpback whale that came into a bay in South Africa. And we all think of how would a white shark bring down a baleen whale? And you think of, oh, a whole lot of sharks would come in and jump on it and tear it to pieces. But no, they're far more intelligent than that. This humpback whale, which was already probably diseased and wounded, came into the bay, and a big white shark came around it. And for 40 minutes, it did nothing. It just circled it. And then it came in and took one bite under the pectoral fin and went away. It wasn't a bite to pull out flesh. It was just a snap bite to make the thing bleed. Another white shark came in 30 minutes later, took another bite under the tail. They basically waited for the thing to bleed out, and then they took a few more bites and then just fed on this dead whale. So it proved, even for the first time with biologists actually witnessing this from a boat, that white sharks were capable of bringing down prey many times larger than themselves, in fact, 10 times their body weight. White sharks also have their own enemies. Lately, there's been a spate of orcas killing white sharks, both in South Africa, around Mossel Bay, and also off the Neptune Islands. It's been witnessed, and also off the Farallon Islands in California, where it was first recorded about 20 years ago. They basically grab the white shark, turn it upside down. The shark goes catatonic, can't respire properly. And then once it's dead, they just bite it and squeeze out the liver. So sharks have gigantic livers full of oil, squalene oil. It's very rich in fat and nutrients, and that's all that the orcas are interested in. Besides, they have peg-like teeth. Their teeth aren't really adapted for tearing prey apart delicately. Their teeth are adapted for crunching hard and squeezing, you know, with powerful jaws, so they can easily make it tear and then push the liver out like toothpaste and feed on it. And finally, I'll finish off with the situation of sharks today. They are under threat. About a third of all known species are threatened on the CITES Red List. Overfishing and bycatch is the main culprit, because so many sharks are caught in the nets of other large fishing trawlers, and several thousand tons of sharks are killed that way. And also just simply overfishing through shark finning, where, you know, especially for the Asian food market, sharks are caught, the fins are cut off, and the shark is put back alive in the water to die a slow death. Sharks are really important to the ecology of our oceans. There are many examples in my book why they make a difference. Reefs, for example, are a great example. Sharks are essential to the health of reefs, and reefs are essential to the health of our commercial fishing industries, because they're areas where fish can breed, especially in marine reserves, and then their populations can grow and spread. But sharks actually eat those kinds of fish that eat the coral. And if they are not around on reefs to keep those fish in check, those fish can overeat the corals and eventually destroy the reefs. So it's a classic example of the predators keep the prey checked in the right balance, so the whole ecological food chain can subsist sustainably into the future. Of course, we're losing sharks due to massive oceanic pollution, ghost nets and things. But we're just losing a lot of sharks that are endangered because the regulations protecting them are not enforced, especially in third world countries where the food value of sharks is far more important than protecting the species that are endangered. Again, I won't go into it in detail, but it's all in my book if you want to read about it, as well as the effects of climate change. In warming oceans are certainly going to affect the reproductive ability of many sharks that have a narrow range of fitness, after which they start to lose reproductive fitness. The future hope, I think, is ecotourism. Shark tourism is rising rapidly all around the world. There are many places you can do shark dive experiences, and you don't even need a cage, only for the white sharks. You can go swimming with bull sharks in Mexico and Fiji, or hammerhead sharks or tiger sharks quite safely in many parts of the world. Basking shark tourism is massively big now in Scotland and Northern Ireland, where up to 300 sharks can enter these bays at the same time. These are massively big sharks, up to 10 meters in length. They're related to great white sharks, but they're filter feeders, so they won't harm you. So I think also the value of sharks for tourism will actually overtake the value as food in less than 20 years, which is predicted in one study by a Canadian fisheries group. So there is some hope that sharks are worth more alive than dead. We might start actually doing something about protecting them and trying to turn around the situation where many of them are on the line to extinction. Finally, did you know that the Greenland shark, a paper published in Science recently, they can live for 400 to 500 years. They're the oldest living sentient species on the planet. You know, sharks like this could have been around when the Mayfair was doing its first voyage to the Americas. Well before, twice as old as Australia, a settlement by Europeans, for example. So there's a lot of wisdom in these Greenland sharks. Sharks survive all 5 mass extinction events. What can we learn from it? Well, there's an epilogue in my book called The Wisdom of Sharks, which I talk about that and discuss the main points, take-home points from how sharks have survived for nearly 500 million years. Can we humans survive for another 5,000 years? That'll be the big question. I think I'll leave it at that. So lots of acknowledgements, people that reviewed my chapters. I treated this book not like one person writing a book, but by interviewing loads of experts from around the world and featuring them as the heroes in the book. So they all reviewed the chapters for me. So I treated it like a scientific paper. Every chapter was peer reviewed by an expert to make sure the information was up to date. And yeah, the book's out. It's just been released in the UK this year. I spent a month over there doing book tours. It's come out in Australia. So yeah, please, if you're interested in this talk, then have a read of the book. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you so, so much. That was really interesting.